My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this story is about choices, courage, and the quiet moments that reveal who we truly are. Stay until the end, because what begins as a simple conversation slowly becomes a life-changing turning point. This is not a prediction about your life or your future. It is a fictional story about two people whose hearts are tested by pressure, expectations, and the difficult decisions that shape every meaningful relationship. The evening was unusually quiet when the conversation began. No one expected a few ordinary words to carry so much weight. Friends and family had gathered, and the topic eventually turned toward the future. Someone looked at the person in this story and said, "It's time to stop looking back. Forget everything that happened. Move on. Find someone else. Get married and leave the past behind." The room fell silent. No one knew what answer would come next. Even the person hearing those words remained quiet for a long moment, searching for the courage to respond honestly instead of simply saying what everyone wanted to hear. Inside, a storm of emotions was unfolding. They remembered every lesson life had taught them, every mistake that had helped them grow, and every promise they had made to become a better person. They realized that moving forward should never mean pretending the past never mattered. Growth does not require forgetting. It requires learning. Healing does not erase meaningful memories. It transforms them into wisdom. As those thoughts settled in their heart, they understood that their answer would not be shaped by fear or pressure but by honesty and integrity. Listen carefully, because this is where the story changes. Instead of reacting with anger or resentment, they answered calmly. They explained that no one should choose a lifelong commitment simply to satisfy expectations or silence uncomfortable questions. They believed that a relationship should be built on mutual respect, shared values, trust, and genuine care, not on pressure from others. The room became even quieter. Some people expected a different response, but sincerity has a way of changing the atmosphere. In that moment, everyone realized they were listening to someone who had grown through life's hardest seasons. As the days passed, the conversation stayed in their mind. They thought deeply about the future they wanted to build. They understood that waiting endlessly for the past was not healthy, but neither was rushing into decisions simply because others expected it. They promised themselves that whatever path they chose, it would be guided by honesty, patience, and respect for everyone involved. That decision brought a sense of peace they had not felt in a very long time. They were no longer living according to other people's timelines. They were living according to their values. Meanwhile, another person in the story was also experiencing quiet growth. They had learned through disappointment that self-worth cannot depend on another person's decisions. They spent their time building a meaningful life, strengthening friendships, pursuing purpose, and becoming someone who treated others with kindness and authenticity. Instead of allowing uncertainty to define them, they focused on becoming the kind of person who could build healthy relationships whenever the right opportunity came. Without realizing it, both lives were being shaped by the same lesson: the strongest connections begin with strong character. Don't skip this part, because the greatest turning point has nothing to do with dramatic speeches. It comes through quiet consistency. Day after day, they chose patience over panic, understanding over assumptions, and honesty over appearances. They discovered that real maturity is not measured by how quickly someone makes life-changing decisions but by the wisdom and care they bring to those decisions. The future remained unwritten, yet it no longer felt frightening. It felt full of possibility because they had learned to let their values, not fear, pressure, or public opinion, guide every important choice. As this chapter closes, the story leaves one lasting reminder. The voices around us may offer advice, opinions, or expectations, but each person must ultimately decide what kind of life they want to live and what kind of character they want to build. Lasting relationships are not created by pressure. They are created through honesty, respect, patience, and mutual commitment. Sometimes the response that changes everything is not the loudest one in the room, it is the quiet, thoughtful answer that comes from a heart determined to live with integrity. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because the story is only becoming more powerful. After that conversation ended, the room slowly returned to normal, but the words spoken that evening continued echoing through every heart that had heard them. The person in this story walked away quietly, carrying not confusion, but clarity. For the first time in a long while, they no longer felt the need to explain themselves to everyone around them. They understood that not every decision would be understood by others, and that was perfectly all right. Some journeys are meant to be walked with courage, even when the crowd chooses a different direction. Listen carefully, because what happens next becomes the true turning point. As another morning arrived, they looked back over every chapter of their life. The painful memories no longer felt like heavy chains. Instead, they became reminders of how much they had grown. Every disappointment had taught resilience. Every mistake had revealed wisdom. Every season of waiting had strengthened patience. Looking into the mirror, they barely recognized the fearful person they had once been. Standing there now was someone who understood that peace is never found by living according to other people's expectations. Peace comes from living according to truth, integrity, and compassion. Meanwhile, the other person in this story continued building a meaningful life without allowing uncertainty to steal their joy. They poured their energy into becoming wiser, healthier, and more confident with every passing day. They learned that happiness cannot be postponed until life becomes perfect. It must be created through everyday choices. A grateful heart, a generous spirit, a patient attitude, and the willingness to keep growing became their greatest strengths. Those quiet habits transformed them in ways that even they could not fully see. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. One afternoon, someone who had witnessed the earlier conversation quietly approached the person and admitted something unexpected. They said, "When I first heard your answer, I thought you were making a mistake. But after watching the way you've lived since then, I understand what you meant. Your actions have spoken louder than your words ever could." Those simple sentences carried more meaning than any applause ever could. They proved that genuine character reveals itself over time, not in a single dramatic moment. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly became months. Life continued moving forward with its usual surprises, challenges, and unexpected blessings. Yet one thing had completely changed. Fear was no longer making the important decisions. Every choice was now guided by wisdom instead of pressure, by patience instead of panic, and by kindness instead of pride. The future remained unknown, but it no longer felt frightening. It felt like an open road filled with opportunities to become an even better person than yesterday. Don't skip this part, because the deepest lesson of the story is unfolding now. They realize that lasting relationships are never built by trying to satisfy everyone around them. They are built when two people are willing to communicate honestly, respect each other's individuality, encourage one another's growth, and face life's challenges together with maturity and compassion. Every meaningful connection begins with people who first learn how to live with integrity when no one is watching. That quiet faithfulness becomes the strongest foundation any relationship could ever have. As another sunset painted the sky with golden light, the person smiled. Not because every question had been answered, but because they finally trusted the direction their life was taking. They understood that some people would always have opinions, but opinions could never replace personal conviction. The road ahead still held mysteries, yet it also held hope. And with every step forward, they carried something more valuable than certainty. They carried wisdom, resilience, gratitude, and the quiet confidence that comes from choosing what is right, even when it is difficult. That is where this chapter ends, but the greatest pages of the story are still waiting to be written. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because what seemed like the end of the conversation was actually the beginning of an even greater transformation. Days passed after that unforgettable evening, yet the words spoken continued to echo through everyone's mind. Some people still questioned the decision. Others quietly began to respect it. But the person at the center of the story had stopped seeking approval from the crowd. They understood that peace comes when your actions remain faithful to your values, even if not everyone understands them. That realization gave them a quiet confidence they had never experienced before. Listen carefully, because this is where the journey becomes even more meaningful. One afternoon, while sitting alone and reflecting on everything that had happened, they realized they were no longer carrying the same burden they once did. The fear of disappointing others had slowly disappeared. The pressure to live according to someone else's expectations had faded away. In its place was a deep sense of purpose. They understood that life was never meant to be controlled by fear, comparison, or outside opinions. It was meant to be lived with honesty, compassion, and courage. That truth became the foundation for every decision they made from that day forward. Meanwhile, the other person in the story continued growing through their own quiet journey. They had stopped looking for instant answers and started appreciating steady progress. Every challenge became another lesson in resilience. Every disappointment reminded them to value character over appearances. Every new morning became another opportunity to practice patience, gratitude, and kindness. Without realizing it, they were becoming the kind of person who could build relationships based on trust rather than uncertainty, respect rather than pride, and understanding rather than assumptions. Don't skip this part, because the emotional turning point arrives in the most unexpected way. One evening, someone who had strongly encouraged them to move on, quietly admitted they had been watching from a distance. They said, "I thought time would make you bitter, but instead it made you wiser. I expected disappointment to harden your heart, but it has only made you more compassionate. I finally understand that your greatest strength wasn't refusing to be pressured, it was choosing to become a better person through every challenge you faced." Those words were not spoken loudly, yet they carried more meaning than anyone in the room could fully express. As the weeks continued, life slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. There were still unanswered questions, and there were still moments when the future felt uncertain. But uncertainty no longer created fear. It created possibility. They discovered that the future does not have to be perfectly understood to be filled with hope. Every day became another opportunity to live according to the principles they had chosen: honesty in every conversation, patience in every challenge, humility in every success, and kindness in every relationship. Those simple commitments became the quiet strength that carried them through every season. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this chapter reveals one of the greatest truths of the story. Real maturity is not found in proving others wrong. It is found in remaining faithful to your values regardless of who is watching. It is found in responding with grace instead of anger, with understanding instead of judgment, and with integrity instead of convenience. Those choices may never receive applause, but they create something far more valuable: a peaceful heart that no outside circumstance can easily disturb. As another sunset faded into the horizon, they looked toward tomorrow with gratitude instead of anxiety. They no longer measured their life by the expectations of others but by the person they were becoming each day. The journey had taught them that the strongest relationships begin with strong character, that lasting trust is built through consistent actions, and that genuine peace is found when courage becomes greater than fear. With that quiet realization, they stepped into the next chapter of their lives carrying wisdom, hope, and the confidence that whatever the future held, they would face it with honesty, compassion, and an open heart. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because the greatest test of the heart often comes after everyone else believes the story is over. Weeks had passed since that unforgettable conversation, yet something continued changing beneath the surface. The pressure from others slowly faded, but the lessons remained. The person in this story realized that true peace could never be borrowed from someone else's approval. It had to be built from within. Every quiet morning became another reminder that courage is not found in pleasing everyone around you. Courage is found in remaining faithful to your values even when the road feels lonely. Listen carefully, because the next chapter reveals a truth that changes the way they see everything. One evening, while watching the sunset, they reflected on the journey behind them. They remembered the fear that once controlled every decision, the sleepless nights filled with uncertainty, and the moments when they almost gave up on becoming the person they wanted to be. Yet as they looked back, they noticed something remarkable. None of those difficult seasons had defeated them. Instead, each one had quietly prepared them for a stronger future. The disappointments had taught resilience. The waiting had taught patience. The unanswered questions had taught humility. Every chapter had shaped their character in ways they could only understand now. Meanwhile, the other person in the story continued moving forward with quiet determination. They had also experienced seasons of uncertainty, but instead of allowing those moments to harden their heart, they allowed them to deepen their compassion. They became slower to judge, quicker to forgive, and more willing to understand the struggles of others. They realized that every meaningful relationship begins with two people who are committed to personal growth before expecting someone else to complete their happiness. That understanding brought a peace that no outside circumstance could take away. Don't skip this part, because this is where the emotional turning point quietly arrives. One day, someone who had once encouraged quick decisions admitted they had changed their perspective. They confessed that watching this journey unfold had taught them something unexpected. They had learned that lasting commitment cannot be rushed by outside pressure. It grows through trust, respect, patience, and consistent actions over time. Those words carried a quiet power because they came from someone whose opinion had once been completely different. Sometimes the greatest changes happen not through arguments, but through the example of a life lived with integrity. As another season arrived, both people in this story found themselves appreciating ordinary moments more than extraordinary ones. A peaceful conversation became more valuable than dramatic declarations. A kind gesture meant more than impressive promises. A relationship built on honesty became far more meaningful than one built on appearances. They understood that genuine love is strengthened by everyday choices, the decision to listen carefully, to speak truthfully, to forgive generously, and to remain loyal to the values that matter most. Those ordinary moments quietly became the most extraordinary part of their lives. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this lesson belongs to every heart. Life will always bring voices that tell you to hurry, to settle, or to choose the easier path. But wisdom reminds us that the strongest decisions are made with patience, sincerity, and careful reflection. The future cannot always be predicted, yet it can always be approached with honesty, courage, and compassion. Those qualities become the light that guides every meaningful step forward. As this chapter gently comes to an end, the road ahead is no longer clouded by fear. It is filled with possibility. Both hearts have learned that true strength is measured not by how loudly someone speaks, but by how faithfully they live. Every challenge has become a lesson. Every setback has become preparation. Every sunrise now carries fresh hope. And as they continue walking into tomorrow, they do so with quiet confidence, grateful for every experience that shaped them into people capable of building relationships rooted in trust, respect, kindness, and enduring hope. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because every meaningful story reaches a moment when the truth is no longer hidden behind fear. The days continued to pass, and life slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, yet something inside both people had permanently changed. They no longer measured their future by the opinions of those around them. Instead, they measured it by the values they had chosen to live by. Every sunrise became another opportunity to practice honesty instead of avoidance, patience instead of frustration, and compassion instead of judgment. What once felt like a burden had quietly become a source of strength, and they realized that the hardest seasons often leave behind the greatest wisdom. Listen carefully, because the most important conversations are often the quietest ones. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had happened, the person at the center of this story wrote down the lessons they never wanted to forget. They wrote that fear should never make life's biggest decisions. They wrote that respect must always come before commitment. They wrote that trust cannot be rushed, and that genuine relationships are built one honest conversation at a time. Looking at those words, they smiled for the first time in many months. They finally understood that growth is not measured by how quickly life changes, but by how deeply a person's character develops through every challenge they face. Meanwhile, the other person in this story continued walking a path of quiet self-discovery. Instead of dwelling on what could have been, they focused on becoming someone who would bring peace into every relationship they entered. They became more intentional with their words, more generous with forgiveness, and more willing to listen before responding. Those simple habits slowly transformed not only their friendships but every part of their daily life. They discovered that kindness has a way of returning in unexpected moments, and that integrity creates a peace no circumstance can easily take away. Don't skip this part, because a surprising moment changes the atmosphere once again. During an ordinary gathering, someone who had once insisted on quick decisions admitted they had learned an unexpected lesson from watching this journey unfold. They said that real maturity is not about moving on as quickly as possible. It is about moving forward with honesty, wisdom, and respect for everyone involved. Those words carried weight because they reflected genuine growth rather than mere opinion. Sometimes the most meaningful influence we have on others comes not through arguments, but through quietly living according to our values. As another season arrived, both people recognized that the future no longer frightened them. There would still be uncertainty, unexpected turns, and difficult choices ahead, but they had developed something stronger than certainty. They had developed resilience. They understood that no matter what tomorrow held, they could meet it with patience, humility, and courage. Those qualities had become the compass guiding every important decision. Instead of searching for perfect circumstances, they chose to build a meaningful life through faithful daily actions. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this lesson reaches beyond the story itself. Every meaningful relationship begins with people who are willing to keep learning that it grows through honest conversations, thoughtful actions, consistent respect, and the courage to admit mistakes when necessary. Grand promises may capture attention for a moment, but quiet faithfulness builds trust that lasts for years. Character is formed in ordinary moments, and those ordinary moments eventually shape extraordinary lives. As this chapter closes, both hearts continue walking forward with calm confidence. The voices that once created pressure have faded into the background, replaced by the quiet assurance that comes from living with integrity. The past has become a teacher rather than a source of regret. The future has become an open road filled with opportunities to keep growing, to keep loving wisely, and to keep choosing hope over fear. And as the first light of another morning appears, the story gently reminds us that the greatest victories are rarely loud. They are found in the quiet decision to become a better person, one day at a time. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter. Because the story has now reached the moment where actions begin speaking louder than every word that came before. The conversations had ended, the opinions had quieted, and the pressure from others slowly faded into the background. Yet inside the hearts of the people in this story, something continued to grow. They had discovered that the most important decisions are rarely made in front of a crowd. They are made during the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when a person must decide whether to live according to fear or according to truth. That choice became the foundation for everything that followed. Listen carefully, because the next part of this journey reveals that real strength is never loud. It is steady, patient, and consistent. As another week passed, the person at the center of this story found themselves remembering not the painful moments, but the lessons hidden inside them. They realized that every disappointment had taught compassion, every misunderstanding had taught the importance of honest communication. Every season of waiting had built patience that could never have been learned any other way. Instead of asking why life had been difficult, they began asking how they could use those experiences to become a kinder, wiser, and more dependable person. That single change in perspective brought a peace they had searched for during countless restless nights. Meanwhile, the other person in this story continued building a life rooted in purpose rather than uncertainty. They stopped measuring happiness by whether everything happened according to plan. Instead, they found joy in small, meaningful moments, a thoughtful conversation, an act of kindness, a quiet evening spent reflecting on how much they had grown. They discovered that confidence does not come from having every answer. It comes from knowing that whatever tomorrow brings, they will face it with honesty, humility, and courage. Those qualities became the greatest treasures they carried into every new season of life. Don't skip this part, because something unexpected begins to happen. The people who once offered advice with complete certainty begin noticing the quiet transformation taking place. They see someone who is calmer during conflict, more patient during uncertainty, and more compassionate toward others. They realize that true maturity is not measured by dramatic promises or emotional speeches. It is measured by the way a person treats others day after day, especially when life becomes difficult. That realization changes not only how they see the person in this story, but also how they begin looking at their own lives. Listen carefully, because this is the emotional heart of the chapter. Both people finally understand that meaningful relationships are never sustained by excitement alone. They are strengthened through trust that is earned over time, respect that is shown consistently, and kindness that continues even during disagreements. They learn that listening is just as important as speaking, that forgiveness is often stronger than resentment, and that genuine care is demonstrated through everyday actions rather than extraordinary moments. These lessons become the invisible threads that weave lasting connections together. As another sunrise fills the horizon, with light, they make one final decision. For this chapter, they will no longer allow yesterday's mistakes to define tomorrow's possibilities. They choose to move forward with open hearts, willing to keep learning, willing to keep growing, and willing to extend grace both to themselves and to others. The road ahead still contains unknowns, but uncertainty no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like an invitation to continue becoming the people they were always capable of being. My beloved child, as this chapter gently comes to a close, remember the quiet truth woven throughout this fictional story. The strongest hearts are not the ones that never face hardship. They are the ones that continue choosing integrity after disappointment, compassion after conflict, and hope after uncertainty. Those daily choices may seem small, but over time they create a life marked by wisdom, resilience, and genuine love. And as the story moves toward its final chapters, one thing becomes clearer than ever before: the future is shaped not by fear, but by the character we choose to build every single day. My beloved child, don't skip these final moments, because every chapter of this fictional story has been leading to this ending. The journey was never truly about choosing between the past and the future. It was about discovering the courage to live with honesty, patience, and compassion. The people in this story had spent so much time wondering whether life would ever become clear. They searched for certainty in the opinions of others, in perfect timing, and in circumstances they could not control, but as the final chapter unfolded, they discovered that real peace had been growing inside them all along. One quiet morning, they stood together and reflected on everything they had learned. They remembered the difficult conversations, the misunderstandings, the seasons of waiting, and the moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing forward. Yet every challenge had shaped them into better people. They had learned that trust cannot be rushed, respect cannot be demanded, and lasting relationships are built one honest choice at a time. Instead of wishing they could erase the past, they became grateful for every lesson it had given them. Those lessons had transformed fear into wisdom and uncertainty into quiet confidence. Listen carefully, because this is the heart of the story. The greatest victory was never proving anyone wrong, it was becoming people who could speak with kindness, listen with patience, forgive with sincerity, and act with integrity even when no one was watching. They realized that character is the strongest foundation any relationship can have. Grand promises may inspire people for a moment, but faithful actions repeated every day create trust that can last a lifetime. Every small act of honesty, every moment of understanding, and every choice to show compassion became part of a future built on genuine respect. As the seasons continued to change, both lives moved forward with renewed hope. They no longer feared what tomorrow might bring because they had learned how to meet every new day with courage. There would still be challenges, unexpected turns, and moments of uncertainty, but those moments no longer felt overwhelming. They knew that whatever came next, they would face it with wisdom instead of panic, with patience instead of frustration, and with humility instead of pride. That quiet confidence became one of the greatest gifts their journey had given them. Don't skip this final message, because it belongs to every heart that has ever struggled through disappointment or uncertainty. Life is not measured by how quickly every dream comes true. It is measured by the person you become while pursuing those dreams. Kindness will never be wasted. Honesty will never lose its value. Forgiveness will never weaken a strong heart. Every choice made with integrity plants the seeds for a more peaceful future, even if the results are not immediately visible. My beloved child, as the final page gently turns, the sun rises over a brand new day. The story ends not with every question answered, but with something even more meaningful: a deep confidence that tomorrow can be faced with hope. The burdens of yesterday no longer define the future. Fear no longer has the final word, growth has replaced regret. Wisdom has replaced confusion. Compassion has replaced bitterness. And with grateful hearts, the people in this story continue walking forward, knowing that the most beautiful chapters of life are written not by perfect circumstances, but by ordinary people who choose truth, kindness, resilience, and love every single day. Thank you for staying until the end of this fictional journey. If this story reminded you of the power of growth, forgiveness, and hope, carry those lessons into your own life. Sometimes the happiest endings are not the ones we expected, they are the ones we create through the choices we make, one day, one conversation, and one act of kindness at a time. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another sunrise is already waiting, bringing with it fresh hope, new opportunities, and the promise that every ending can also become the beginning of something beautiful.